Okay, and we are starting up the show here. There's my little clickety-clack, which apparently nobody can actually hear yet, but I can hear it over my headphones, so one of these days I'll get this worked out. I am James Downard, the old RJ, tortucan.wordpress.com, Troubles in Paradise, the methodology of creationism, where I am attempting to demolish anti-evolutionism one bloody source at a time and infect everybody on Earth with proper source methods because we ignore it to our peril. Okay, we'll stop sharing that and close that little file down. And Jackson Wheat just stepped out for a moment. He'll be back after a bit, and we'll probably do a little upgrade on things. Oops, I need to adjust my bloody camera. See, I'm an amateur at this. Good gravy. Give me some slack. I admire all of the extremely professional people like Pelogi and all the rest that actually know what the hell they're doing. Lisa Fitcher says, hi, RJ, can't stay long, got an interview at 6. You can catch it later on the actual feed. Insects are cool has become a subscriber, and we were just kind of side chatting about the Cambrian explosion, the new Irwin and Valentine book that I wanted to get for some time because Steve Meyer goes at it in Darwin's Doubt, and I wanted to be able to see the primary sources. It's a really neat. You are going to love that book. Not Darwin's Doubt, but the Cambrian Explosion book, because there's a whole bunch of stuff. It looks like it's beautifully illustrated. I was just flipping through it. It's got some neat stuff about what cladistic nodes mean, stuff on the genetic systems and how these interconnect with how they arrive at working out what the phyla are and the origins of the phyla and latest systematics. And it'll be very, very useful. So I'm glad I got it just for that, in addition to the fact that I'm going to be wanting to use it to analyze Darwin's Doubt, Steve Meyer's book, who I used to bump into in the ancient days when he used to be a philosophy professor up at Whitworth College, now a university here in Spokane. So this is certainly a good one to glom onto. I was able to get it from a Amazon gift card from over Christmas, and you can make it a double feature. You can get Evolution Slam Dunk at the same time at Amazon and help the old RJ and see my thing. I found another typographical error that somebody had spotted. I've been jousting at Nathan Lentz's site because he's been attacking Behe, and someone spotted a typographical error in my section on chloroquine thing where I typed N instead of K. So thank you so much for that, snark, Frank. And I will correct the sources accordingly. The main subject, oh, Jackson, hi, he's back. The main subject matter for the first part of the show is, of course, my ongoing analysis of Contested Bones, which is Rupe Sanford's Young Earth Creationist book that a viewer asked me to analyze because he didn't want to have to do it. And so I've been going through and constructing a reference bibliography and finding out what's sorted where, and if it's a new source, checking out what the content is and matching the content up with what's going on in the show. And as usual, Rupe just keeps on giving. C. Brown, who's the little creationist who keeps on snarking on these videos, if you've been watching the comments on them, he pops up all the time, and I expect to be popping up on this one. He had the gall to complain because last week I had put up some of the secondary sources, Stringer and others, that Rupe had misrepresented, saying, here you're relying on secondary sources. You miss the point. I put primary sources up where relevant, where I can get to so you can get a link to them. The point is that it's Rupe misrepresenting the secondary source, and I wanted you to see the secondary source. So he needs to read up on that. Lisa is asking, is Homo naledi young enough to get partial DNA? Hard to tell. They're still having difficulties figuring out how to date it. You'd have to be really young to get really detailed RNA. It would have to be probably within the 100,000 years or less range to get a full sampling on that. So cross fingers if they can find a recent one, then they may be able to do that. Psy Strike's here there. Yow, yay. He is usually doing umpteen other things. He's the reason why I'm doing these damn videos. It's all your fault, Cy. Anyway, Contested Bones is staying at the same basis. There's less than 2 sources per page. He's recycling a lot of the same arguments. Last week I mentioned about their skulls, and now and a bit about the brains. Well, we're still in the brain factor, and the sources that I put up are direct examples of where Rupe is stepping right over contrary information. Details about the skulls, like one of the sources, the one I think from National Geographic, explicitly mentions that the tooth molar structure is ape-like, not human, in their jaw. So how can this be a human? How come nobody in the paleoanthropological field is classifying Homo naledi as Homo sapiens or arguing? There's no dispute about this. There's a dispute as to whether it's a branch of some other Homo genus or whether it deserves its own classification, but nobody's saying it's a human. But the one that I really love is this bit down here. I was on page 188, and you can see how I annotate and make a mess out of everything as I go through it. This is the second time he's quoted. Rupe and Sanford has quoted this. As Willerman and researchers note in the journal Intelligence, quote, in italics, there is no strong direct relationship between brain size and intelligence among modern humans, unquote. Note 37, boom, down there, Willerman et al. In vivo brain size. Well, the paper is available. I put the link up. That quote never occurs in it. Zero. It's not in the text. Worse, the paper says exactly the opposite. As I will read from their abstract, you'll be able to read the whole bloody paper because I put the link up on it. It is widely believed that human brain size and intelligence are only weakly related to each other. Using magnetic resonance image, we show that larger brain size, corrected for body size, is associated with higher IQ in 40 college students equally divided by high versus average IQ. I'm not a great fan of IQ tests, for one thing, but the point is it doesn't matter whether Willerman's thing is accurate or inaccurate. The fact of the matter is Rupe and Sanford misrepresent Willerman. As it turns out, there does seem to be a mild indication that larger brain sizes tends to correlate with more intelligence as measured by the stupid IQ test. There were some other papers that I encountered as well. I didn't put the links up on those. Not all of them are available, open access and that, so you just have to put up abstracts. But the point is that now twice Rupe and Sanford have made a quote that is not in the original text and that is belied by the content of the paper they just quoted. Have at that, C. Brown, and see if you can explain how they managed to do that. Or are you going to defend on that little front? Anyway, so the upshot is that I've been hoping and hoping and hoping that poor old Rupe and Sanford might catch the scholarly methods bug and actually start playing fair with their source material, but they have not yet managed to do that. I'm going to keep track of where the hell I left my little thingy here. Oops. Oh, there we go. I'm suddenly losing track of where I'm at on this. The role of the scholar is a sad one here, especially if I lose where I put my bookmark. The upshot is that there's a consistent pattern among Rupe and Sanford scholarship, and functionally this is Rupe because he's the one that takes main credit for it. Sanford is kind of an appendage in this area, and Jackson and I already know how bad a scholar Sanford is. Holy moly.
Yeah. Yes, he's pretty bad.
Yeah, Sanford is a selective researcher, and he was basically letting Rupe run the game. And Rupe is not running the game very well. He deck stacks. He's searching for authority quotes to get what he wants. And his model, Homo naledi, has to be just a weird human being. Oh, insects are cool. I already became a $1 patron. Thank you. I'll put a bit up about the patron side. Every one of you, I'll be giving a big thanks in the middle of the show to everybody, and we'll and next week you'll be added on as I check the Patreon site and update all of that. Now that I finally unlocked that Patreon account, wow, I'm actually getting money, and so that's really nice. It means that I can afford food and ink in the same month, which has improved things enormously, being able to do that stuff. The upshot is about Rupe and Sanford is that they are a consistent pattern of incompetent scholarship. They have an argument that they wish to be true, and they only ferret around for authority quotes and blips of information that reinforces it. And they don't tell us what their model is, really. How is anything related to anything? Are humans completely separately created? And when was that? They hide their own ball, because I know Sanford believes in young earth creationism, and I'm assuming Rupe does too. He has a really narrow paper trail. He hasn't popped up anywhere on there. Hold Scratch. Hello, Scratch. Better late than never. This is going to be a tight one today. I can't go over because there's a meeting of some atheists over in Post Falls, which is about a 45-minute drive away, and I'm going to be heading out right away. After the show is done. I'll be arriving kind of late anyway because they have about a 6:30 start time, and that'll just barely give me a chance to get out there. But I've been wanting to coffee clutch with them for quite some time, and it's close enough. And we didn't get any extra snow, notably here. What it did over in Post Falls, I'll have no idea. But at the very least, it's not too bad here, so I didn't have to worry about shoveling an ice berm at the driveway. And so we're primed and stoked to go. So you follow up on that. I put quite a few of the papers up there you can go and take a look at, including the Willerman paper. All this wonderful information that you find when you follow up on the sources. The thing that I want everybody to kind of catch the bug on is not everybody is going to be keen on investigating everything. But find a topic that you really love. In the case of insects are cool, you obviously think insects are cool. So you're going to want to study those sorts of areas, and anything where an anti-evolutionist is veering into the subject or not. It's revealing that Gunther Beckley, who is the Intelligent Design Wing's in-house paleontologist now, apparently got a religious conversion, and now he's on the ID bandwagon. You can never pin him down much about what he thinks is going on with insects. Is anything related to anything? And as a consequence, there isn't really a model there. All he's doing is kind of recycling the stuff that's been argued in intelligent design apologetics for quite some time. Oh, insects are cool, like the bombardier beetle. Check out at my tip website the Dino Mania chapter, because I've got a big section on the bombardier beetle and how Dwayne Gish was traipsing around that little puppy. It's a fascinating thing that's the work is continued about pygidial glands and about the moderators and elements that are involved in the bombardier beetles and the phylogeny and stuff since then. And one of these days, if I end up being able to do an updated version, I'll put all that in. But I've got the basic groundwork even in the Dinomania chapter. Dinomania is on dinosaurs. It's also on flood geology. There's stuff on Noah's Ark. There's an awful lot in that chapter. It's practically book length. So go ahead and check that one out at my websites. Korag says insects are immune to genetic entropy, apparently. Hear that, Jackson? Yeah, that you'd think that if there had been
humans,
decline,
evidently.
Yeah, and practically everything else. Insects also are interesting in being largely impervious to mass extinctions. I think the only one where they really took a hit was the Permian mass extinction. And usually insects are relatively imperturbable. They're diligent little things, as you discover when you try to get cockroaches out of your kitchen.
There was a paper last year that came out about an insect that, you know, everyone's seen the stick insects and the leaf bugs. Well, there was one that evolved to look like liverworts.
Philocrista. Yeah. These fascinating bits about the different kind of mimicry that can go on. Given the number of organisms that there are, these mimicry examples are relatively rare, but they're absolutely gobsmacking. Jerry Coyne always likes to bring them up. If you're a follower of his Why Evolution is True website, every example of peculiar mimicry that pops up, he will be right on it and call attention to it, because these are fascinating problems. He does
a lot of ecology stuff.
Because you're talking about the interaction, and I think there's even some work I've been talking on. I'm not sure whether I've got into the bibliography in that yet, but where they're detecting how a mutualism that's occurring in a mimicry is starting to shift because the thing it's mimicking is altering because of climate change. So that you've got this dynamic that's a changing pressure because of the shifting climate, and therefore its host copyist goes on. And I think the two kinds of mimicry, the one where you're actually mimicking something to avoid being eaten, and there's another one where you have a fake mimicry. There's a couple levels. I can't remember. One's Batesian mimicry and all that. Somebody who's an expert on that can bang my head over it. I don't remember all the terminology as best as I could on this, but it's an interesting subject, and it cuts to the core not only of how ecological interactions interact, but the genetics that are underlying those adaptations, why the thing can end up looking the way it does. It's not magic. It's doing that. It's modified features, and you therefore expect, if you had a perfect fossil record, you'd be able to see the whole shift in. And then the other issue that always I keep in the back of my mind is incipient mimicry. To what extent is something kind of looking like something else? So how many of these mimicry episodes are we not spotting because it's a mild form yet? It hasn't turned into something that's very, very precise. And how far of typically are they extremely long
That's
lineages
a fair point.
an awful long time? And so anybody that has any technical literature or may have studied this directly, let me know on it. There are people that put up things, have you heard of this paper or not? And sometimes I've heard of the paper, but other times I haven't. And so everything where I didn't know about a particular topic comes up, and I'm adding them into the mix. So although I do my Twitter jousts and the like, and I do my evolution hour here, most of my time is spent on working on the books and working on the project and pulling in the data field and assembling all the different arguments that are going on to do as best as possible. And remember, if you have questions and you're on Twitter, shoot them at me. I'll be happy to supply information to the best of my ability. I'll be happy to do discussions on it on the show. Any way you want to get to me, you can. You can talk to me through all contributors, get my email address so you can link to it that way. Information is too beautiful not to share. And everybody, I think, she'll want to know about it because it's just neat shit. It's just absolutely fascinating. There are so many things to worry about and discussed in the world and things going awry, but the world of science is in a golden age. Accessibility, I can find this information at a speed that was impossible to do 15 years ago. And let alone earlier when I was just starting out on this project in the 1990s, this meant having to go to the damn libraries and physically photocopy things and that. So you whippersnappers, you know how lucky you are to be able to get all this information directly. And you have absolutely no excuse. Nobody in 2019 has an excuse for ignorance because the information is way too available. Korag says, do you know if young Earth creationists think there are several different kinds of snakes? Do they believe boas are related to cobras or rattlesnakes to anacondas? I haven't gone all the way through the kind chapter yet. Was there any... I don't recall too much on the snake matter so far. Do you recall anything, Jackson? On the baraminology of snakes? Have they worked out how many snake kinds there are?
Not from what I read. No, she was basically just
it didn't ring a bell on there. I'll keep that in mind. We have to remember that most of the animal kingdom has not gotten the baraminology thing done.
Especially
they've tiptoed. Yeah, they've tiptoed into just certain areas. They started out basically working out some really nice controversial things like sunflowers or working out canids and the dogs, but yet they don't deal with the myosids. And so it's all been a matter, and there's only been one study attempt on the reptile-mammal transition, and they dealt with a peripheral family, a little bit on dinosaurs, a peripheral amount on birds, and they just ignored all the fossils. I mean, it's just data avoidance on a gigantic scale. And when you compare that to what you get in real systematic papers and how meticulous they are, wow. The Lisa Fortune goes laugh all out. What's a kind? It's
who knows?
To be fair, creationists do bite the bullet on this, but they're forced to by the theology. As I pointed out on other episodes, they have to figure out how many kinds there were on Noah's Ark. And so, and there's only limited space. So they have to keep the number of kinds to a minimum, and yet they have a problem. They've got to keep the kinds down to sometimes they're a family, sometimes they're an order. They oscillate around depending upon which ones they are and how curious they are. But one group and one group only must be a species kind, and that's us. And so they have to indulge in colossal double standards because the moment you start allowing horses from Heracitherium to Equus all being in the same monobaramin, how can you keep us removed from Homo erectus and Homo erectus from Australopithecines and Australopithecines from farther back on into the primate group? I mean, where do you draw the line? Well, they just avoid and flush the data.
Purdom and Hodge and Leitner, when they wrote their paper on how to determine kinds, they cite the blastula stage. I think.
Once
it reaches the blastula stage, the problem is there is no single the blastula stage. In the same way, there is no family. There's no single family. There are different ways to define families.
Yeah.
You know, a blastula is a part that
what you're seeing in that, and we'll be discussing it in the Rocks book, is basically they're doing this. They're just scratching their heads and trying to figure out how to shuffle the deck around. Insect said that they read a book by John Morris trying to come up with a number of species on the ark, and I think he just picked a random number. Yeah, pretty much they all pick random numbers. I've really wanted to see a meticulous breakdown of how many kinds there were on the ark and on what basis they did it. Woodmarapp did his feasibility study of Noah's Ark back in the 1990s. It's not very detailed. And Leitner doesn't explain what material she's drawing on for her bird things, where she comes up with, like, I think 186, 196, something like that. And it's very superficial. And everybody knows you'll see the level of detail insects in that Irwin Valentine book. And also, if you read Valentine, Jackson and I were just discussing Valentine's earlier book from 2004 on phyla. Holy moly, that thing is just gigantically detailed. So what you're reading in the Irwin book, the kind of light addenda to what Valentine was doing in the main phylum book, and each one of those connect up to just a vast array of technical literature on here.
It's wonderful. Yeah, he cites just stuff all across the board. He looks through if something is even claimed as being in this potential or as potentially being in this phyla, he includes it and includes all the studies, the back and forths that have gone on among researchers trying to classify these things. Like he did that with a Nidarian, because I'm reading the phyla book right now, thanks to Savannah, and it's so good. He, you know, with the he even goes through like the different camps fighting over, is this thing an Nidarian? Is it
benchmark meticulous analysis? I became a colossal fan of Valentine after seeing that book, because it was just a gold mine. You always knew that he was going to put out every objection and issue that was related, the problems that need to be dealing with, the difficulties of trying to figure out what some of these little oddball phyla are, Ecdysozoa and all of that. It's tough to do, because all you have are living forms and then very fragmentary information, if at all, in the fossil record. And then you're trying to work out from 500 million years later what was going on. I mean, that's not easy.
Yeah. With a whole lot of organisms that we have, a whole lot of animals, there is no fossil record.
Yeah. At all. I even made a list, and that's why I'll be delighted at the fact that you've got that updated version in Irwin and Valentine. But even as it was, I think the overall thing is the same, that half of the animal phyla have no fossil record at all, let alone going back to the Cambrian. And so any creationist that goes, well, all the animal phyla appeared in the Cambrian. Oh, really? You know that? How do you know that?
It's interesting
because we don't have phyla. Half of them don't have fossil record.
Well, even the ones who do, not even all of them appeared in the Cambrian. A number of them are from the Precambrian. Actually, one is even from the Ordovician. The
graptolites, I think, and of course mollusca goes back, the small shelly fauna into the earlier Cambrian. Annelids go back before then, and the other point is that quite a few of the phyla are only put in the Cambrian because we found their evolutionary ancestors in the Cambrian. The chelicerates, as an obvious example, they don't even have the chelicerae yet. They haven't even evolved that. There's the characteristic of the phylum, and you talk about intermediate form. And then, of course, the chordates. This was the one where I got a blank stare from Casey Luskin the one time I bumped into him when I asked him the question about it. Weren't the paleontologists expecting the ancestral forms of chordates in the Cambrian to resemble lamprey larvae? And they did. So in what respect was this not a fulfilled evolutionary viewpoint? You know, you're not having fish with bones and jaws and all of that. No, you find things that are resembling the very basal forms. That's all you're finding. It's still fascinating to show what was going on in there, but it's revealing, and you'll find that insects are cool. When you read Darwin's Doubt, look around to see how much description he doesn't give of things, and find out how difficult it is to get a listing of the phyla. They're often buried in his notes. and that he slides past. Keep an eye out for tunicates, because those are the little ones that are at the very basal group of chordates. And then pay attention to chelicerates and all the rest. And the other point is don't take his word for it. Go into the source material. Most of the technical papers will be available online these days, so you'll be able to track it down. And I guarantee you're going to find way more information reading the original papers than you are in Myers's gloss. When you get to the when you get to the Punky chapter, Punctuated Equilibrium, it's the longest hit and run I've ever seen. I included him in my one of the postings that I have at Tip is on Punctuated Equilibrium, because I keep a catalog of everybody that shoots their mouth off on it, and everybody gets this wrong. They're misunderstanding what Gould and Eldridge were talking about. A lot of them riff off of it, and Meyer should have known better. He was this very long pileup of authority quotes. Never does he discuss a specific example of how it's applied, and he even gets the facts wrong. He flat out says that Gould and Eldridge came up with allopatric speciation concept as a way to get rid of the fossil record problems. Well, they didn't invent it at all. That was Ernst Mayr.
I mean, but that, yeah, that's that even goes back. Well, the roots of that even go back to Darwin, I would say.
Oh yeah, the fun part. Insects Are Cool asks, have you read his other book, Signature in the Cell? What do you think about that one? I've looked through segments of that one. That one basically is kind of Michael Behe ain't cellular processes wonderful on steroids. But I have to go through all the details of it. I did do a bit of a quick source analysis to find out, because I was curious to see how many references he had. Between the two books, they have a total of about 1,600. And I think there's an awful lot of overlap. Well, I had 2,300 in Slam Dunk, so I'm not exactly gobsmacked by how detailed all of that is. But yeah, I've looked through a bit more of the Darwin's Doubt book than I did with Signature in the Cell. There's been quite a lot of criticism online that he gets a lot of his primary source data material. He's trying to show that it's a gee whiz, ain't it magical bit. And Jackson, you were just mentioning, Sal, that you might have need of some discussion on that. So I've got the book, and I'll be able to funnel whatever information you need out of it if we're going to be including it in the book.
Because the next video, the person, I'm actually doing a response video, which isn't something I do a whole lot, but it's something I've been kind of thinking about doing, and someone suggested it on Twitter. And so one of the sources, because this guy only has like 4 sources, all anti-evolutionists, one of them is Signature in the Cell. And so I was just, so I was asking about that.
Yeah, you can find out what it is you need to find out about it, and I'll be able to look the thing up. They're about the same size of book, and they're about 500 pages long in manageable print, but again, relatively under-referenced. And I know in particular topics that I've looked up, most of the ones have been relating to the paleontology angle, because as you may have noticed, I'm kind of a paleontology geek, so I go into that even more than
no. Do tell.
Yeah. Do tell, yeah. Insects Are Cool asks, what about debating Darwin? Debating Darwin's Doubt. Have you looked at that one? That one, it's I'm not familiar with that one. Other than it's a discussion about the book. I'll have to my reference bibliography isn't up, so I'll have to beg off on that one. I know that the various groupies at the intelligent design movement make a point of defending it to the death, that everything he says is correct. But that's the same thing with Michael Behe. You get this recycling of the tropes over and over and over and over and over again. Generally speaking, criticisms, I don't rely a hell of a lot on other people's criticisms of these works. I go at it from the source methods level, which is to look up the primary sources yourself and find out, A, is he fairly representing the sources directly? And B, is he leaving stuff out? And that's the major area. That's what makes source analysis both delightful and also frustrating, because it really involves having to read way beyond their box. That most people who come up with incorrect viewpoints are parsing material based on a limited data field. This is true of anti-vaxxers. It's true of flat earthers. It's true of just about anything that believes stuff. They're leaving stuff out. And you have to read widely to find out what they're leaving out. Yeah, Jackson?
Donald Prothero actually wrote a really good review of Darwin's Doubt, where he just flattens Meyer. It's called like Stephen Meyer's Fumbling, Bumbling Cambrian Follies, I think is the name of it. Of course, he goes through like point by point by point and just rips the book to shreds. Of course, because Meyer's not a paleontologist, Prothero is.
Oh yeah, and I don't know whether I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it now. The glorious moment I had up at Whitworth. Steve Meyer was doing a lecture for his class on Cambrian explosion, and this was open to the public. I'm a public, so I decided to go. And my sister was going with me. She was taking notes in the back of the room, and I was sat down front. And during the Q&A afterward, he was basically spieling the same argument that he does over and over again about information in the Cambrian and the abrupt appearance and so forth and so on. If you've read any of his stuff, either in his book or any of his other articles, it's basically the same shtick. But anyway, I had a particular question I wanted to ask him because I had bumped into him before on these matters, and I was trying to deal with the issue of fossil preservation. And so I prefaced it by saying about how difficult it was to preserve fossils in the period previous to the Cambrian. And I asked him, how many Tomotian Lagerstätten are there? And he just froze because he had no idea what I just asked him. That Tomotian didn't seem to ring a bell, and Lagerstätten didn't ring a bell.
The very word he should know for his book.
and which I had discussed with him in previous occasions. And he just stood there for like 10, 15 seconds. My sister in the back of the room was suddenly looking up because there was no words coming out of his mouth. And finally, I could just see his gears going in his head because he didn't want to say he didn't understood my question, because then he would sound like he wasn't professional enough in front of his class. So he just had to phrase it. And finally, he says, "And your point is?" And then I explained what the point was. The fact is there are no Tomotian Lagerstätten. We do not have that Lagerstätten class of deposit prior to the Cambrian, all the way back into some of the stuff that we have a few deposits in the Precambrian, like the ones that can capture phosphatization. But even the Ediacara, most of the Ediacara biota, they're not really Lagerstätten level. They don't have enough fine point detail. They're not like what you get at the Burgess Shale or Sirius Passet or these others. And if you don't have those, if you remove the 3 Lagerstätten in the Cambrian from the data field, you would have almost no Cambrian data. You'd have trilobites, and that's about it. That's why it was called the Age of Trilobites, because they had shells, so that they left all of that. So the matter is trying to get the data field on there. Oh, Insects Are Cool says, I found the John Morris thing. It's called the Global Flood. Basically says only mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians were on the ark. That would be about 21,100 species. And of course, that proved to be an argument that was utterly undefendable, because he was thinking only in terms of living birds, reptiles, and mammals. There's 10,000 species of birds. You got 2,000-3,000 species of mammals, and you've got, I think, about 8,000 or 9,000 species of reptiles. I have to check up on the number on that. But anyway, if you limit yourself to species, it makes it easier to accommodate them in terms of non-evolution sins. But you can't cram them all on the ark. And of course, what about dinosaurs? What about therapsids? What about miacids? John Morris, who was not a paleontologist and didn't pay much attention to paleontology, he died, I think, in 2006. And really, most of his works, he was dealing with a lot of religious apologetics in the last 10 or 20 years of his life. So really, you've got to go all the way back to the 1980s. And 90s to find some stuff. And by then he was co-authoring stuff with his son, John, who does have a geology degree and does a variety of, I love these people with their degrees. Yeah, well, it's honored in the breach, apparently. That's another factor that you'll find insects on who gets what from where. That you have a new breed of the younger creationist who won't have access to those books. They will not be book readers, so they will not know about Henry Morris and Duane Gish and the Genesis Flood except secondhand or by hearsay. They'll be relying on what you get online, and that's a very different venue. as you'll find with Evolution Slam Dunk, that there's very little done online on it. And literally the only creationist who's ever even tried to discuss the probenignathans, and he was doing a shell game to dismiss them, was Duane Gish in his 1995 book, which means nobody who's relying just on the internet for their creationism is going to be able to find out any of that. So that's why in bringing up the reptile-mammal transition, you get cricket sounds very fast in people because they don't know where to look.
That was actually... Mitchell bumped into the reptile-mammal transition very tangentially in the part I'm reviewing. She brings up, or she mentions... Oh, you're going to have fun with this because she mentions Meckels Cartilage. And so she's...
And what year is she writing this?
What year is this? This is in book 4, so it doesn't have dates really associated. It just has.
I seem to think some of those. It's either 2007-ish,
17
to 2027. Okay, well, if it's 2017, she's really up the creek because we have fossilized Meckels cartilage from the reptile mammal transition stuff. It's exactly the way evolution predicted.
There's there's a paper I cited, 2012 paper, that has the step by step description of how the Meckels cartilage fits into the jaw to ear transition. And so
and that means if she is writing after that information, either she didn't know about it, in which case she's obsolete lazy, or she did know about it and suppressed it. I'll go for the obsolete lazy part because I'm not a great fan of hers. Let me do my shameless plug section and also our wonderful Patreons. There we got that over there. There's our bunch. And our colleagues Andrew and Hindrel and Eric. InSec will be adding you to the list in due course. Researchers Keith and Fino and Brad and Ralph and Meet Convert Me and Pelagia. Hi, Pelagia! And Tsur, and assistant researchers Dyer and Doranku and James and Nana and Staggles and Surus and Totes Real. Surus is helping me do the audiobook of Fog. We'll also be doing an audiobook of Evolution Slam Dunk too. That'll be a trickier thing to do because converting a science book to an audiobook format will require a lot of rewriting. But fortunately, I know the author, so I think I can talk him into it. And then in the friends, Eat Meal and Stephen and Marigale and Daniel and Bo and Alex and Paul and Zeshi and some legacy patrons as well who helped out earlier on, but not recurring. Jen and John and Mona and Son and Everett. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It has all been enormously important. And then let me put the links up in here. So there's the WordPress.com website. All the material in there is open access. Please download it from the Map of Time to the various books that I put up and the links to all the stuff. And Patreon, where every little bit counts to make it easier to get by one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 month at a time. And then also there's GoFundMe.com DCGo. I have a page there as well that you can donate. You can be a recurring donator there too. So there's a bunch of different routes to go by. And every little bit helps, and the more the merrier. I don't want anybody to impoverish themselves or to have to sell the house to support the project. No, no, no. But if you've got some spare cash or said, hey, there was that latte I was going to get, I could spare $5 a month, $1 a month, something like that. That could work. All of that adds up, and it allows me to keep going on things like I've been able to like get ink and food simultaneously, and occasionally get the new books and things that pop out so that I can keep up on things and not have to be scrabbling around for donations. So there, thank you very much. There's my stop sharing mode. We can get back to the actual matter at hand. Mutable Destiny says, forgot he was also an engineer, apparently. The engineering field has an interesting pedigree. There's an awful lot of physical engineers particularly in the old Earth creation, young Earth creationism, but the old branch of young Earth creationism, Patterson and a lot of these others. You get a certain amount of information-y types, the computer programmers, but some of them will veer off the map completely and turn into geocentrists and flat earthers. And then you've got the philosophers, a little bit of mathematician types. Bill Dembski is a mathematician. And a few biochemists, quite a few biochemists, because Michael Behe, Michael Denton are biochemists. a very rare number of geneticists. Usually they fall into the young Earth creationist category, like Sanford and Carter and Jeffrey Tompkins.
Heard him.
But yeah, Purdom. And the point is yeah, they got degrees, but does that explain what they write?
Especially when she knows, she has to know. I mean, as you've seen, we caught her in 2 different counts of data suppression from literally the very paper she's reading.
Oh yeah. So. And this is why the source methods issue is so relevant, because the primary rule is never take anybody's word for it. Don't take my word for it. I try to put up references so that you can follow up on your own. I'm not infallible. I can make a mistake. Some creationists just caught me on a typographical error in Slam Dunk where I typed an N instead of a K, and I just said, thank you. I'll correct that in the next edition. If I can do a full print edition with pictures, I keep on running off on that. But everybody can make mistakes. But the data is always there. And the goal of any model is to account for the data. And the more you know about the data, the better it is. And you can try to discuss data and force people who are trying to just spew generalities to discuss the data. If you can't, that's why questions are so useful, and appropriate questions like asking how many to-motion Lagerstätten there are, that you can measure somebody's knowledge on an area. Look at the mess you ran into, Jackson, with Cordova, on how clueless he was on so many biological matters, and yet he was pontificating on these things.
Oh, yeah, it was a little interesting because he was like an aeronautic engineer or whatever, and then he became interested in proteomics, quite a career change. And then he's talking about all these cell biology things, and he's talking about how difficult it would have been for prokaryotes to become eukaryotes, but he's never heard of anything regarding this transition. Like,
he's never studied it. Why? Because all he's done is read the secondary sources and copy them. He's read his Sanford, and he thinks it's absolutely true, which brings me to the second segment, the Denis OLeary file, and the stuff that they have. I put up a bunch of links. Denyse O'Leary is a Canadian intelligent design groupie, and she is secondary source addict par excellence. If you look at her various postings that she's done at Evolution News, they're often literally dozens of links to largely secondary sources, and it's like a scattershot vomit of evolutionists are so absurd. Look at, they claim this and 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 this. Well, when you look them up, actually they're wonderful papers and they're fascinating, and usually you have to look farther because she's not looked at the original papers. Well, I put some examples up of some of her recent vaporings that I thought were particularly amusing. She's got some stuff in there about epigenetics. She's riffing off of Jonathan Bartlett, who is a young Earth creationist who's now writing in the intelligent design venue, who's riffing off of all people, a paper from Eugene Koonin, of the last person on Earth any anti-evolutionist should dare try to invoke as an authority figure. So I put the linkages up to that. Koonin is just one of the fabulous writers. He's a technical analyst. It goes across all venues. He did a paper in 2009 that just dropped my mouth. It was in RNA. It was a survey of the various issues on multicellularity origins. And I knew a lot of the material that was already in it, but I kept on finding, I didn't know about that. Wow, I didn't know about that. Ooh, I didn't know about that. And it's also been ignored. I think Casey Luskin alluded to it once, this paper that Koonin did. And it wasn't even on its content. It was on a thing about mutation rates. And I'm going, did you pay attention to what was going on in that? But that means it opened the door. That means that anytime Casey Luskin ever shot his mouth off on like choanophagilates or anything, I'd go, excuse me, but didn't you read the section from Koonin in this paper that you cited but did not discuss? No, that was a big blunder on his part. But anyway, Denyse O'Leary even praises, Richard Milton. She brings up Richard Milton and his criticisms of evolution. Well, Milton is my poster child for scholarly incompetence. And those of you who read Dino Mania, I put the link up to that in the video description. You'll see the various stuff that I have on Milton. Milton was just about my age. He was at least up, I don't know if he is still now, but he was editor of British Mensa magazine. And he is functionally a young Earth creationist without being religious. I didn't think that was possible, but he established it, because what he did was he would read young Earth creationist apologetics and swallow them whole and copy them secondarily. It was just terrible. When I first came up with the thing that eventually led to the Tortugan concept, that bit about William Jennings Bryan saying, I don't think about things I don't think about. I was applying that to Richard Milton. He was the example of somebody where I'm going, what? How can you possibly not notice it? He would make orders of magnitude mathematics mistakes constantly. He would swallow Velikovsky. It was just terrible. And so the idea that Denis OLeary in 2019 is waving Richard Milton's 20-year-old anti-evolution stuff as though it has any validity whatsoever is the blind leading the blinder here.
You know what's funny, RJ, is I had a flashback of Ray Comfort while reading some of Mitchell's stuff today, and that is an insult if I've ever heard one. You know, I want to read it, RJ. I just want to tell you what it is. Listen to this. But each creature has its own kind of DNA directing the process, and at no time in science do we see DNA of one creature mutating to produce new information that can change the organism into a new kind.
Ooh,
what in the absolute heck does that mean?
Yeah, and this is but yet you find exactly the same argument in Darwin's Doubt with Steve Meyer, and the argument that, oh, the Cambrian explosion had, imagine all the new information that had to come in. And I'm going, what? What new genes? It's hard to even find any new genes that are involved in the Cambrian explosion. To get to the phyla that we see, you find the components of them pre-Metazoans. And
it seems like she's saying something was already alive. DNA was mutated and it became something else.
Yeah, and you'll notice she gives no examples of it. I mean,
what?
If you try to do as a thought experiment, what would the DNA of a basal synapsid be compared to a mammal 100 million years later? And think about step by step by step how much gene changes need to be done when you're not talking about adding homeobox genes, you're not talking about adding on PAX genes, you're not talking about adding on sonic hedgehog or any of these other, they're already there. What does it take to take that basal synapsid in 100 million year long process to where you find mammals? You're talking about regulatory changes, not new genes. So the same thing is going on with the Cambrian explosion. And even from what I can see from glancing through the delightful, I'll put another plug, the Cambrian explosion book that goes in there. And of course, readers of Slam Dunk will be aware that I go into quite a lot of these little gene details in that as well. It wasn't the main point of Slam Dunk to deal with that, but it comes up when you're talking about how the jaw systems and the bone structures and allometric changes in anatomy and that are going, you're talking about these regulatory genes acting on these basal system genes. And there's been a huge amount of technical work that's been found in all of these areas, and none of it looks like new information. It looks like natural variation on existing systems that produce novelty over a great amount of time. And that's why the reptile mammal transition is so significant, because there's so many members in there. Oh boy, if I can do an illustrated edition of that. Anybody out there know a publisher that wants to be able to do this? Let them know. Or harangue Jerry Coyne or anybody else that has been published and say, hey, help out RJ get a second edition of this thing in the wing so we can do one with illustrations, because that's what Christine Janis said it needed, and I agree completely. I had to rush this thing in. And I think I've got all the typographical errors weeded out, but who knows? It's to err is human, but correct requires a sound method. And Lisa for Truth brings up this. You have first to define kind, and we're going to have a whole chapter in Rocks Were There book on that kind issue and how just incoherent and inapplicable it is. It's full of double standards. It's full of data selection. It can't quite get a grip on anything. And because you've got that polarity. You got too many things to cram onto the ark. And I've also been putting up to make sure that we have a clear conception in the new chapter on the fact that there's two bottlenecks, not one, that every organism that was initially created, that turns into all the fossil forms, and those are preserved in the flood. Then the same set of initially created organisms are mutating in a completely different way to turn into all the existing species that we have. And creationists haven't quite caught up with the fact that they've got these two mutually contradictory bottlenecks to where you have to ask, where are Dimetrodons? Where are pachycephalosaurs? Why are they not here? The whole point of the ark was to preserve the kinds. Why don't we have a basal ceratopsid kind or the basal whale kind if you let Kurt Wise run amok? No, it's an absolutely hilarious operation going on that in any attempt to read about any attempt to work out what Barrowman's aka kinds are, it turns into a mess. And switch over to the intelligent design side or old earth creationism, and it's crickets. They don't do systematics at all. They don't have the flood to worry about. So they literally never do anything on this subject. If anybody knows any attempt by any intelligent designer or anybody in the U. Ross old earth creationist orbit that's tried to do a creationist systematic, please let me know. I would love to see it and love to include it, and will in fact include it. But I don't know of any.
The sad part is about the baraminology chapter, and this is something we were talking about last night, is how little systematics there actually is. A few poster child cases, and that's it. They barely talk about anything.
I think I may have mentioned en route in Dino Mania that I'm a dinosaur geek. As anybody that knows me knows, I'm up the yin yang. I don't need creationism to be interested in dinosaurs. I was interested in them already and will be interested in them to my dying day. So I am fascinated with those. I've got masses of little dinosaur models and things down in the basement that I've collected over the years from the various Carnegie collection and the British Museum and all these others, because I'm a dinosaur geek. And when I was thinking about all this dinosaur knowledge that I knew about in the 1990s when I started work on the tip book, I was going, I can't use it because they don't discuss dinosaurs. And it turned out finally I got a bit of it in Duane Gish, where he sort of tiptoed into the dinosaur field. And even today, there's a little bit more on it. There's some books on trying to dismiss birds and a few other things in the line, but it's still remarkably sparse. And given how vast the dinosaur array is and how much work is being done by the paleontologists in the field, Paul Serino and all the other ones that are Dodson and all the rest, in ceratopsids and all that, and the systematics work that's been done. And of course, paleogenomics, where they're recreating bird beaks out of the archosaur skull and all of that stuff by tweaking the genes and working out the actual genetics of that. Whoa, this is neat. And then you go over to anti-evolution land, and it's just like crickets.
Yeah, they have they take a few studies because they don't do any, and try to take some of the conclusions like M. Aaron did. Like he took a few Tyrannosaur papers and was like, "Yeah, here's a kind."
Or another reason for reading Dino Mania. And I'll just put the thing in there. You'll find the website thing at the thing. You can click on that and go to chapter 3, Dino Mania, which was it's about book length thing. But anyway, I've got the section in there about Duane Gish and his flame-throwing Parasaurolophus. I mean, can you top that for stupidity? That he tried to argue that Parasaurolophuses might have been flame-breathing dragons that St. George would, and you still Ken Ham, one of his little creationism books, has St. George slaying a baryonyx in the illustrations, and you're going, oh no.
Well, the first answer, it's in the Answers book 1. We'll actually get to that chapter later because it's written by Ken Ham. Very point. So we'll be getting to that.
Yeah, he likes to do that. Brian Stevens says, laugh out loud, look out, Jackson, there's a tentacle after you. That is the dreaded, it isn't a crocostimpy, it is a killer cat.
There he is.
There's a vertebrate. Oh, it's one of the proofs of creation because it's a cat.
What is it size? I said, is there nothing they don't consider proof of creation?
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, that's that everything. And there are a few creationists you may have stumbled upon them once in a while that they're particularly nasty. They'll say, "Here's all the evidence that exists for evolution," and you look to the page and it's blank. I've seen websites and that do that. It's not done very often, but I go, "Don't have the reptile mammal transition in there, do you?" Anyway,
If they've even heard of it.
yeah, so we're busy little beavers on the Rocks Are Still There book. We're aiming it to be a extremely up-to-date compendium that no one really has taken on all the different characters. There's been some scattershot criticism of Jeffrey Tompkins and Jensen and others, but I think we're cutting a new level, a bar for how much we're going into. And to make sure that it's ridiculously up to date, we have quite a lot of 2019 papers in there that anything every once in a while we'll go, "Ooh, did we know about this?" And then I will have to fold it into the material. So we'll be updating right up to the time we finish all of the whole thing. I'm doing the grunt work on the indexing and make sure all the bibliography is all tidied and all that stuff. And then I'll be doing continuity between chapter structure. But I got a big metaphorical hat nod to you, Jackson. You're doing most of the heavy lifting on the other chapters, and I am delightfully grateful to you.
They're creationists. It's not that heavy. It's
no, but I mean, I learn stuff every single chapter on material that I wasn't aware of, and a lot of the connections on things. I buff it up and add additional material where I go, "Oh, wait a minute, that connects up with this material here," and I bring other stuff in that I've had. But you've done a wonderful job in terms of the structure, and you were doing the same technique that I was doing in my old work, where you take their argument and you demolish all of it. So you look at their every single logic chain they make, and then you disintegrate it, which means what defense do they have if you've demolished all of their points? That was the technique that I was using in my old work, and I think it's a great one, because instead of just taking a single point to deal with, you dissolve the whole edifice. Where do they have to go?
Right. I mean, heck, I'm learning so much from all of this. I feel like my knowledge of these subjects has, I hope, increased because of how many technical papers I'm having to look through on this stuff, because they barely touch it. I mean, yeah. It's ridiculous. Like the pig, one of the Bearmans they talked about was, they say, "Oh, well, because it's a family unless it has to be in order." So they say peccaries and pigs are Zooidea, and that's just, that's a kind, because they kind of look alike. Yeah. Well, actually, there's a whole lot of stuff going on there. There is like biogeographic stuff, because the pigs start in Asia, peccaries go to North America, and you got pigs running around.
Don't you know they all come from Mount Ararat?
Right. Yeah, and then there's a slew of fossil forms all over the place. They of course go into South America once the bridge connects up.
And let me predict how much information that the creationists bothered to assess of that fossil information. None.
0. It rhymes with Nero. The part with Purdom, or not Purdom, Hodge, where he does his chapter, because he's totally a geneticist, about the mutations. He does his analogy with the little sentence, like, "Oh, this is what this mutation is like." The problem is that you have to dig into the technical literature and actually see, oh, these mutations have been occurring. Here's an example of this one. Here's an example of this one, providing benefits to the organism. And he just doesn't pay attention to any of it.
The thing that it reinforces, there was an old line from Martin Gardner, who was a famous skeptic who did a mathematics column in Scientific American back in the ancient days. And his book, by the way, if you've never read Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science that he did in the 1950s, get it. You can probably get it super duper cheap. I think Dover Books has had it out for years. It's an absolute masterpiece classic. On things of flat Earth and Velikovsky and a lot of other things in there, that it's wonderful. But anyway, he made a very sage remark. If you want to know how little you know about a subject, write a book about it. Because the moment you take on that bigger task of not writing just an article or a blog, but actually writing a book and doing justice to the subject, then you find out how little you may know about it, and then you learn a ton in the process of actually working it out to make it book-sized. And I think we're doing our darndest to do something that's going to be a delicious entry into the field. That between slam dunk will be one end of the vise, and then rocks will be there at another end of the vise, and we're going to be squishing an awful lot of things in between them.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. The thing is, they're basically writing blog posts. All of their chapters are blog posts, and it takes a page to explain why one of their paragraphs, which has
look at
4 sentences, is wrong.
Sanford's book is an extended blog post. I was blown away at how superficial it was. Just compare Sanford's book or this book that I've been analyzing, the evolution book, the Contested Bones, with James Valentine's phylum book.
Oh yeah, no contest. I mean,
that's a science book. There's a thing where you realize that's what scientists actually do. This meringue fluff that passes as science in some of these. No, that won't work. Insects, of course, is James Dowd. After actually looking into the Bible and creationist arguments, I feel like I'm learning a lot more. Oh yeah, anti-evolutionism can be a fantastic springboard, because in the process of reading up on the material and checking out the primary sources and all of that, you will learn a scad. I've progressed an enormous amount even since I wrote the other book. So read through Dino Mania, or on the Bible apologetics, you might want to look through Because the Bible Tells Me So, and Human Evolution. I put a lot of effing work into the old tip book, and the reason why it never worked out as a book is I realized, my God, the thing was 1,000 pages long. It was too big to do as a book. It had to be on a bigger scale. And
Stephen King's The Stand says otherwise.
And somebody who was enormously verbose in the department was Robert Heinlein. Oh my God! If his later novels were these just sentence vomits, where you're just getting on. Jubal Harshaw, shut up for a couple pages. I mean, these long things. So they were things you had to wade through. Anyway, we're very far afield. We're up at 6 o'clock. I need to shut down because I got a meeting to go to. And thank you very much. We will all see you all next week. Help out with Tip in any way you can. Send us questions and discuss. Keep on telling everybody about the works. We will thank you, Insect Lover, for being a new patron, and you will be mentioned in the next plug and plug that we've got on there. Hi, Cy. Hope you enjoyed the show. Cy Strike says, Kitty, well, you got a pug. You're not a kitty person. And say hi to Bob the Wonder Jeep. So anyway, thank you very much, and we will see you all next week. And keep on plugging and keep on being reasonable, and don't accept any wooden penguins.